back again for another visit. We have had many good visits over the years, and we look forward to another good Sabbath day together. All right, the Trojan Horse. The basic is very familiar. The Greeks were the independent city of Troy, but they were having a lot of difficulty. They laid siege to the city for 10 long years with no success. Finally, they came up with an unusual strategy. They constructed a huge wooden horse, hid a select force of men inside that horse, rolled it right up near the walls of the city, and pretended to sail away as if they were giving up on the whole siege. We quit. And the Trojans, with more curiosity than caution, pulled the horse inside the city as a trophy of their victory. And that night, the Greek soldiers crept out of the horse, opened the gates of the city for the Greek army, which had sailed back under cover of darkness. The city of Troy was taken, and the war was over after 10 years of failure. The strength of Troy's defenses were breached by curiosity and deception. We may well be prepared for a direct attack, but totally unprepared for an unexpected diversion. There's another story that comes to us from World War II. The French had faced invasion from Germany in World War I, and they were determined never to let that happen again. So they built a line of concrete fortifications, obstacles, and weapons in the 1930s on their borders with Italy, Switzerland, Germany, and Luxembourg. They called it the Maginot Line, and it was impervious to bombings and tank fire. No one could penetrate it. Seemingly, there was no way that the Germans could ever invade France again. So what did the Germans do? They ignored that line completely and invaded France from the Low Countries and the Ardennes forest, where the French thought that the terrain was so difficult, no invasion could happen there. Meanwhile, a German decoy force sat opposite the Maginot Line to occupy the attention of the French, thinking they were coming through that line. So the major problem with the Maginot Line was the false sense of security it gave to France. Have we had Trojan horses and Maginot Lines in the recent history of Adventism? I submit that we have had exactly the same problem of curiosity and a false sense of security, and have been successfully invaded while our guard was down. Adventist truths have been under attack from the very beginning of this church, way back, and we prepared our defenses very carefully to withstand a frontal assault. We were able to respond very effectively to objections to our doctrinal beliefs for many years. We had well-defined responses to Catholicism and liberal Protestantism. So, the master strategist, Satan, devised a Trojan horse to attract our curiosity and lower our sense of danger. You see, we are not the only ones and the only church to believe in the absolute authority of the Bible and the soon coming of Jesus Christ. Our evangelical friends, those in conservative Christian churches, seem to be much like us in personal salvation by God's unmerited grace through faith, as well as a strong drive for soul winning. We feel that we can learn so much from them in the effective growth of churches, in attractive church methods and worship, and the retention of our youth. We have fought the worldly enemy of worldly standards and the lack of faith known as liberalism for many years. But we have been blind, I'm afraid, to the equally dangerous enemy of conservative evangelical beliefs. So our curiosity and our sense of doctrinal security allowed us to allow that Trojan horse inside our walls, right into the heart of Adventist beliefs. And the danger for us is the same as for the people of Troy. The total destruction of Adventism is what is at stake right here as the remnant church of prophecy. So, what we're going to do this morning is take a very close look at this Trojan horse that is sapping the life out of Adventism. What is the heart of this well-defined set of beliefs regarding salvation? There are 5 major issues at the root of this gospel. Number 1, involuntary sin. What does that mean? This is the belief that all become sinners simply by being born. Number 2, the unfallen nature of Christ. This is the belief that the humanity that Christ took upon himself was the sinless nature of Adam before the fall, or maybe a hybrid nature, partly fallen and partly unfallen. Number 3, salvation by justification alone. This is the belief that the ground of the Christian salvation is justifying righteousness only, as distinct from the transforming, empowering righteousness of regeneration and sanctification, which are only results of salvation. Number 4, justification is exclusively declarative and not transformative. This is the belief that the justifying righteousness of God only declares a person righteous and not making him righteous. Number 5, the imperfectibility of Christian character. This is the belief that even through imparted divine strength, perfect obedience to the law of God remains impossible for the Christian in this life. Now, in light of these evangelical beliefs, this evangelical gospel, it becomes imperative that we understand the true gospel. I've done this several years ago, way at the beginning of our relationship, so I'm not going to cover that completely again. But following are a few very brief responses to the evangelical gospel. In the area number 1, involuntary sin. 1 John 3:4. Whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law. Ellen White calls this the clear definition of sin, the true definition of sin, and 8 times she says it's the only definition of sin. In commenting on this verse, she says it means to willfully transgress the law of God through word or action. That's not something you get at birth. That's a decision that we make. All right, a little more. James chapter 4, verse 17. Therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. Can a baby do that? To the one who knows. John 9:41, Jesus speaking to the Pharisees. If ye were blind, ye should have no sin. But now ye say, we see, therefore your sin remaineth. The sin for which we are condemned and lost is never involuntary or a state of birth. It is always a choice that we make. So number 2, Jesus Christ's nature. Desire of Ages, page 49. It would have been an almost infinite humiliation for the Son of God to take man's nature, even when Adam stood in his innocence in Eden. But Jesus accepted humanity when the race had been weakened by 4,000 years of sin. Like every child of Adam. Did you catch that? That's you and me. He accepted the results of the working of the great law of heredity. What these results were is shown in the history of his earthly ancestors. He came with such a heredity to share our sorrows and temptations and to give us the example of a sinless life. So Christ did not exempt himself from our nature because he needed to be tempted like we are tempted, both from outside and from within our fallen nature. Numbers 3 and 4. Selected Messages, page 394, volume 1. Having made us righteous through the imputed righteousness of Christ, God pronounces us just and treats us as just, therefore being justified by faith. So justification can never be limited to just a declaration, you're righteous. It is always a transforming process as God forgives us. And then the last point about whether there's any perfection. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. Isn't that what Christ did when he was on earth with his heavenly Father? And here she says, and here the Bible says that every thought of ours can be in captivity to God in faithfulness. From Ellen White, In Heavenly Places, page 146. Everyone, please notice that word, everyone who by faith obeys God's commandments will, not may, not must, not should, will reach the condition of sinlessness in which Adam lived before his transgression. And my friends, one of Satan's most accepted lies is that perfect obedience to God is impossible as long as we have fallen natures. That is taught throughout Christianity and even within Seventh-day Adventism. Everyone who is faithful to God will come to that point where they are no longer sinning and rebelling against God. Now, it's very important to remember that full character maturity is not a requirement for salvation as demonstrated by the thief on the cross. He didn't come to full maturity. He had a bare minimum of time to accept Jesus as his Savior, and that's all that is required for salvation. He certainly was not spiritually mature, but he surrendered his life in faith to God and was willing to be and do whatever God asked him to be. That's what God asks of us if we desire to be saved. Mature perfection, character perfection, or sinlessness is for an entirely different purpose, and I want to share why that is necessary. The very image of God is to be reproduced in humanity. Desire of Ages 671 says, the honor of God, the honor of Christ, is involved in the perfection of the character of his people. It's not our honor, it's not our character that is involved here, but it is God's name and his character. He has promised that he will perfect his people. The question is, can he do it? That's what's at stake here. Christ Object Lessons 148. The honor of his throne is staked for the fulfillment of his word unto us. You see, when God promises something, he puts his name behind the promise. His throne was at stake when Christ came to this earth, and his throne is at stake in what he will do through the last generation. The honor of his throne. Now we must remember Satan's challenge against God and his law. We find it in Signs of the Times, January 16, 1896. Satan declared that it was impossible for the sons and daughters of Adam, that's you and me, to keep the law of God, and thus charged upon God a lack of wisdom and love. If they could not keep the law, then there was fault with the lawgiver. So notice carefully, Satan's charge was clearly leveled against fallen man's, you and me, ability to keep God's law. So God has devised a response to Satan which will be so clear that not one question will be left in the minds of God's universe for the rest of eternity, whether God's law can be kept or not. Revelation 7, 1-3 tells us that the winds of destruction will be held until God's people are sealed in their foreheads. So what is this seal? Faith I Live By, 287. It is a settling into the truth, both intellectually and spiritually, so they cannot be moved. Are we settling into that truth? Are we getting settled intellectually and spiritually in our hearts so we can't be moved by Satan's deceptions? In a special vision, Ellen White saw the angels of Revelation 7 in her lifetime ready to let the winds go. And look what we're going to find. Early Writings, page 38. While their hands were loosening, this is in the 1800s, my friends, and the four winds were about to blow, the merciful eye of Jesus gazed on the remnant that were not sealed. And he raised his hands to the Father and pleaded with him that he had spilled his blood for them. Then another angel was commissioned to fly swiftly to the four angels and bid them hold the winds a little longer until the servants of God were sealed. So the reason that Christ didn't come during her lifetime and has not come in our lifetime yet is God's mercy. He will never send his remnant, this final group of people, into the cataclysmic struggles of planet Earth while they are unprepared. And the only way they can be prepared is by receiving the seal of God. These people, this generation, are facing the greatest danger and challenge ever seen in human history by the people of God. They are facing the close of human probation. That has never happened in 6,000 years. And Satan's last desperate attempt to destroy God's plan of salvation. So again, we have a reference here from Testimonies, Volume 5, 746. If there was ever a people in need of constantly increasing light from heaven, it is the people that in this time of peril God has called to be the depositaries of His holy law and to vindicate His character before the world. And I say that demands a full understanding of the plan of salvation and our place in the completion of that plan. Desire of Ages 763. Every character will be fully developed, and all will show whether they have chosen the side of loyalty or that of rebellion. Then the end will come. God will vindicate His law and deliver His people. And please note that God does the vindicating of His own name, but He will do it in the characters of His people. It is a divine human cooperation. The fully mature development of both the righteous and the wicked is necessary for the final vindication of God's character and His law. That's what sinlessness is for, to demonstrate the truth of God and the lie of Satan. All right, now, let's take a closer look at this Trojan horse that has insinuated itself into the heart of Adventism. We can trace its beginnings in the United States to a new to Protestantism method of interpretation of prophecy called futurism. This method was actually begun by Catholic scholars to deflect the Protestant identification of the Catholic Church as Babylon and the Pope as Antichrist. All the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation were placed way into the future, with a yet unknown individual as the Antichrist of prophecy. Now, in the Protestant version, the 70th week of Daniel 9 was placed in the future. The Old Testament prophecies of the restoration of the Jewish nation had to be literally fulfilled. The temple would be rebuilt in Jerusalem. The Battle of Armageddon would be the final battle between the Jews and the heathen. Also included is a secret rapture of the faithful, so they wouldn't have to go through the final traumatic period of Earth's history. All right, that's the Protestant version of futurism. These beliefs are shared by a number of conservative evangelical Protestant churches who believe, notice, in the absolute authority of Scripture and the soon coming of Christ, and who emphasize evangelistic fervor and church growth. All of these are shared by Adventism. There are some other evangelical teachings. Number one, the atonement was completed at the cross. It was finished. Nothing more needed to be done by anyone. Number two, the 1,000 years in the future are going to be on this earth, with Christ reigning on this earth and the whole world under His control. Number three, the soul is immortal and goes directly to heaven or hell as soon as we die. Number four, hell burns forever. And if we are unfaithful, we will burn in hell forever. And number five, the Sabbath really has been changed to another day of the week, the first day of the week. Those are also teachings of evangelical Protestant churches today. Now, the interesting thing about the evangelical movement in the United States in the last 40 years is that it has morphed into the political arena. During the early 1800s, there were several political parties which settled finally into two parties called the Whigs and the Democrats. Soon the Whig Party disintegrated and was replaced by the Republican Party that we're familiar with today. These are our parties, but notice the positions of these parties have changed dramatically in the last 50 to 100 years, so our parties of today are not even close to what they were back 100 years ago. And today, these parties, as you've noticed, have become so polarized that labeling and demonization have become the norm. If you don't agree with my party, you're the enemy. We're seeing a lot of that today. Now, this evangelical movement that I'm talking about has immersed itself in modern power politics. In the 1950s, religion and politics began to form alliances. Billy Graham and other evangelicals began to promote anti-communism at first. One nation under God became a catchphrase. Religious leaders began to promote free enterprise and big business. They talked about the United States as a Christian nation. There was even a proposed constitutional amendment protecting school prayers in public schools. Now, as evangelical theology has become increasingly linked with politics, an interesting thing has taken place. Since evangelicals were primarily conservative, their political leanings became exclusively conservative. And evangelical theology began to take second place to conservative politics. Evangelicals saw conservative politics as their only mechanism to effect moral change in America, because America was becoming so negative and worldly. Modern society has been damaged by godlessness and lawlessness, with absolute truth being replaced by whatever works for me. And the boundaries of sexuality are becoming hopelessly blurred. That's our world of today. So evangelical conservatism joined itself permanently to conservative politics in the United States as the only way to defeat moral degeneracy and save the United States for the place where Jesus would come to reign over the whole earth. That is what has happened. I found an interesting comment by Billy Graham in 1981. Listen to what he said. I don't want to see religious bigotry in any form. It would disturb me if there was a wedding between the religious fundamentalists and the political right. The hard right has no interest in religion except to manipulate it. And yet, in spite of that warning, the two have linked together, evangelical conservatism and political issues. Since Adventists share many concerns in the same way as evangelicals do, it was very easy to agree with them about conservative politics being the only way to nullify the corrosive influence of liberal religious beliefs combined with liberal politics. Once again, our defenses against liberalism outside our walls caused us to ignore the dangerous Trojan horse of conservative religion and politics invading our minds and our churches. If only we would have followed Ellen White's wise, inspired counsel to bury political questions, to have nothing to do with political parties, we might not have opened the doors of the Trojan horse quite so widely. But we did, unfortunately. And suddenly, a new issue took center stage in the religious evangelical alliance with politics, and it was abortion. Now, I want to make it very clear. I do not in any way support abortion, neither does the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But I'm talking here about how abortion has become a political issue. In 1968, that's a ways back, even Christianity Today, which is an evangelical magazine, refused to call abortion sinful in 1968. In 1971, delegates to the Southern Baptist Convention allowed abortion under certain carefully defined circumstances. That was reaffirmed in 1974 and 1976. But in 1979, opposition to abortion became the rallying cry for evangelicals due to the influence of a Catholic activist who coined the term the moral majority and saw the effectiveness of the abortion issue in defeating some very liberal politicians in 1978. We can use it. We can get them out of office and get our men into office. This resulted in what we call the modern religious right, and the Catholic Evangelical Protestant Alliance, which believes that morality can and should be a matter for political legislation. Make no mistake, the use of civil power by apostate Christianity is making coercion a substitute for conversion and will lead directly to the formation of the beast in the United States of America. I think it's significant that in August 2018, a state-like dinner was held at the White House for 100 evangelical leaders to celebrate evangelical leadership, especially in politics. It would be well to remind ourselves that religious liberty means two different things for Adventists and for evangelicals. Adventists believe that freedom of conscience is for all, especially minority beliefs. We advocate freedom for Catholics, for Protestants, for Buddhists, for Muslims, and even atheists. They have the right to believe what they want to believe. But evangelicals and Catholics advocate liberty, their version of Christianity. Since they believe that's the only way of salvation, other beliefs are heathen and do not merit special protection. That's a different version of religious liberty, which denies totally true religious liberty. The disturbing reality is that the same people who stand the strongest against abortion and stand for moral values are exactly the same people who want to unite with conservative Catholics to restore a Christian dominionism that will trample on liberty of conscience for minorities. Evangelical theology has been hidden inside evangelical politics and is the greatest danger our church has faced from outside Adventism. How tragic it is that evangelical theology has penetrated so deeply into Adventist theology that we are actually promoting it at the highest scholarly levels, and we are marginalizing those who believe in genuine Adventism as fanatics and fringe groups. And so this is the Trojan horse that has been fascinating Adventism right now. And we allow it in our midst as the peril for our reason for existence. We have formed our Maginot Line against attacks by the enemies, and Satan has just bypassed our carefully prepared defenses by appearing to be our friend and our ally. And we are opposed to the same things as they are: abortion, homosexuality, etc. You can name a lot of things. We, like them, are the same. And we are being dragged also into the muck of political involvement. We don't seem to realize that evangelical theology and evangelical politics are broken cisterns. They are the false prophet of the book of Revelation. They are Babylon, my friends, with their hands stretching across the gulf to form the image to the beast. Can we really trust an ally with a movement because it supports a few strands of truth? The army outside the walls is also hiding inside the horse while we sleep on. We desperately, my friends, need to return to our Adventist pioneers. They refused to get involved with party politics. They just had nothing to do with it. Now, they stood for moral issues like temperance and religious liberty. And we can too. They opposed errors in society like slavery. And they opposed immoral laws like the Fugitive Slave Act. But they never supported the political parties of their day, and they refused to get involved in the dirt of modern power politics. I don't think we've learned their lesson as effectively as we should have. My friends, we are here for two purposes. First and foremost, to prepare our characters to receive the seal of God and put the final nail in the coffin of Satan's lies. And second, to prepare our hearts to be ready for the latter rain and take this truth of God to the entire world before probation closes. Matthew 24:14 will see its fulfillment as the gospel goes to every nation and tribe and tongue and people. Here are they that keep my commandments, is the final message. And I just say, may that day come very soon. Do we need to wait another 100 years, as this time we have already delayed the coming of Christ for over 100 years? May God's grace prevent that from happening as we respond to his call.